The hearing for the Senate's Small Business and Entrepreneurship Committee will come to order. I have the honor of chairing that committee. I want to welcome my two colleagues who are joining us today, Senator Chris Van Hollen, who serves on the Appropriations Committee and also chair of the subcommittee that has responsibility for the small business agenda, and Congressman Andy Harris, who also serves on the Appropriations Committee on the House side. So I want to thank both of my colleagues for underscoring the importance of small businesses to our community, and that we work together to do everything we can to help small businesses do better. This hearing is, I think, a very appropriate title for dealing with the resiliency of small businesses in our economy today, the challenges that we have. I want to start by thanking Mayor Tittle for his leadership here in Berlin. It's always a pleasure to be in Berlin. We had an opportunity to visit with some of the small businesses before this hearing. And we know this is a very livable community. We know people love living here and visiting here. And we saw that enthusiasm on the shop owners that are doing business here. They're not only doing a great service from the point of view of economic activities, but they do it in a way that is so important for the growth of the community. It's sustainability, it's healthy foods, it's helping moms deal with the challenges of motherhood. It is all those things that they do to make this community not only an economically viable community, but a fun place to live. It makes it a much more exciting place. I did note with the mayor that the only thing that was missing on the main street, something he doesn't want to see, a chain store. So that's good that we are able to keep the really local businesses and local owners here in Berlin. I want to also just point out, this hearing is mainly to focus on the challenges we have in rural areas. We recognize that rural areas have additional challenges. We've seen that over and over again. We've seen the challenges that occur from COVID-19. We've had challenges in regards to natural disasters that make it much more challenging for small businesses. So we know that we have to pay attention to those issues. I think all of us today, our hearts and prayers go out to the people of Hawaii and Maui for the tragedy that occurred there. It's unspeakable, the loss of life. I know my colleague, Congressman Senator Arono, is holding a hearing tomorrow in Honolulu. I'm sure it's going to deal with those issues. Our committee will do everything we possibly can, working with the Biden administration, to provide all the help we possibly can to the people of Hawaii. It's unspeakable, the loss of life. Those of us who have been to the town that was destroyed know what a special place that was. It was special like Berlin because of the small business operators that were in Lahaina. So now they're going to have to rebuild. We want them to rebuild. It's going to be very, very difficult. They don't have the deep pockets that large companies have. And they need our partnership. They need our governmental partnership. So we recognize that we have special responsibilities as a government partner. The communities of small businesses have rebounded from these tragedies in the past. In this region alone, you had historically the peach blight. You've had hurricanes Hazel and Irene. You've had tornadoes and flooding. You had COVID, and the businesses are here. The small businesses have shown resiliency, but we know we have to do more in order to help in regards to resiliency. As I've traveled around and visited the small business owners in rural Maryland, I hear the same challenges: lack of opportunity for capital, that banks are just not available in rural communities with small businesses to get the type of capital they need to open a store or to expand their operations. We hear about the challenges of workforce. Rural communities have challenges with workforce generally, but under a tight labor market, it's even more difficult to get trained workers in our rural communities. And connectivity. We learned during COVID-19 you cannot survive without connectivity. And we know in the rural parts of our state, we don't have the same capacities that we do in urban centers in regards to access to our internet. So we're ready to help. I say that because I think we have a track record of helping. During COVID-19, we were able to pass the Paycheck Protection Program, the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program and Grant Program, the Restaurant Revitalization Fund, the Shutter Venue programs. These bills were done and created bipartisan because we recognized we had a challenge we had to meet, and it helped. This committee is an advocate for small businesses. We want to know what we can do better. We have many resource partners that are available to you. I want to acknowledge Steve Umberger, who's here. He's the regional director, Baltimore office that handles the Eastern Shore of Maryland. He's available. He gave out a lot of his cards this morning, so I hope you'll be getting a lot of phone calls. We have the SBDCs, that's the Eastern Shore region located in Salisbury to help our small businesses. We have the Minority Business Development Agency. The infrastructure bill gave it a specific charge and focus to put more of its resources into rural areas than it has in the past. We have women's business centers. We've gone from, in the last 4 years, from 1 to 4 women's business centers in Maryland, now 1 located in Salisbury that can help our small businesses. We have a Veterans Business Outreach Center now located in Maryland. We didn't have one a few years ago. We have a SCORE mentorship program located in Dorchester County. So we have resource partners that are available to our small businesses. I'm working very closely with Senator Ernst. She's the ranking Republican member of our committee. I want to acknowledge that her staff is here with us today. Graham, thank you very much for being here. We are working and taking this information to work together. When I say we're working together, we passed 12 bills out of our committee during this past work period, many dealing with some of the challenges that we're going to be talking about today. In addition, 5 small business bills were included in the National Defense Authorization Act. All these are bipartisan efforts to help small businesses in our community. This hearing will give us a chance to show how we can better serve small businesses in our rural communities. And I want to first recognize my 2 colleagues. I'm going to recognize the mayor for some introductory comments, and then we'll hear from our distinguished panel of witnesses. So let me yield to Senator Van Hollen.
Well, thank you, Senator. Thank you, Senator Cardin. It's great to be here in the town of Berlin and to see a room full of people focused on trying to make sure that we help our small businesses and other businesses succeed and make sure our communities can flourish. And I do want to thank Senator Cardin, Chairman Cardin, who chairs the Small Business Committee in the United States Senate, and is also the leader of the Maryland Congressional Delegation. I'm sure you know that he has decided not to seek re-election, and I just want to take this opportunity while we're all here together to thank him for his steadfast leadership on small business issues and all issues important to Maryland and the United States. So thank you to Chairman Cardin. It's okay, you can keep going. No. So I also do want to thank our colleague Andy Harris, Congressman Harris. Obviously, we don't agree on every issue, but when it comes to some of the key issues, helping this congressional district, we look for common ground, and I know we're going to talk about some of it today, including the blue catfish and the worker shortage, especially in the seafood area and other issues. Let me just emphasize a few things Senator Cardin said, and he really went through the highlights, and so I won't repeat them. But we all did go through a very difficult period during the pandemic, and that was especially true, of course, of small business owners and retail. And that is why we worked on a bipartisan basis early on in the pandemic to pass emergency relief like the Paycheck Protection Program, like the EIDL program, like other programs. But we know that rebounding is not enough. We need to continue to grow and advance. And that's why I look forward to hearing from the testimony of our 4 witnesses. I know you're going to be introduced by the chairman. Thank you all very much for being here. Look forward to learning from you and getting additional ideas. We work very closely with the Commerce Department as well, and the EDA program, as well as a number of other federal programs to try to find resources, seed money, and lower cost loans from different federal agencies, including, of course, the Small Business Administration, to help all of you grow and prosper. So let me again thank all of you for being here, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the opportunity.
Thank you, Senator Van Hollen. Congressman Harris.
Thank you very much, and I do want to thank the two senators for being here and recognizing that rural areas are different. Whether you're in Maryland, whether you're in the Midwest, wherever you are around the country, rural areas are different. That's why I'm particularly pleased to chair the Appropriations Subcommittee that deals with USDA. USDA is an important partner to rural areas, both on the business side and the agriculture side, and hopefully we can keep our rural areas vigorous. You know, when the senators drove down from, those of you who drove down Route 50 here, you pass a whole lot of family businesses on the way down. You know, if you go through Talbot County, you're seeing Taylor's Produce on the side of the road, small family-owned farm that runs a business. You come through Cambridge, Hubbard's Hardware on the west side of 50 as you come through town. Look, competing with fortunately in Cambridge, we don't have a Home Depot or a Lowe's for them to compete with, but they do compete with larger companies, and the playing field's not always level. As you go through Trapp, there's Freedom Fuel, an independently owned, family-owned gas station. I mean, you know, these are things that you just don't see much of anymore, but you see that here on the Eastern Shore of Maryland. And some of them world-class businesses, family-owned, Hardwire in Pocomoke, a major defense contractor, a niche contractor. They make a niche product, but it's world-class, literally a world-class product made right here by small family-owned businesses. So again, I want to thank Senator Cardin for scheduling this, for listening, for both senators, understanding the importance of small, especially the family-owned businesses in the Eastern Shore of Maryland and in general rural areas throughout the country. So thank you very much, Senator.
Thank you. We are joined by Mayor Tydal, who is doing a great job as mayor, and his wife Chelsea is with him as well. Thank you for your hospitality here, and more particularly thank you for stepping forward. You've got a tough job being a mayor of a city. You can't hide from issues. Senator Van Hollen and I and Congressman Harris can go to different parts of our district or state when there's a challenge. You can't. So thank you for your public service.
Well, thank you. And I don't know, many of you probably don't know this, but Senator Cardin was one of the first folks that called to congratulate me after I did win election as mayor, and that really meant a lot. I think then you said roughly the same words, that it is the local level of government that really does face a lot of those challenges. So we appreciate the work that all of you do, and your offices are very responsive to our questions, and that means a lot. With that, Senator Cardin, I will say it's a bit odd because I'm usually sitting where you're sitting with our mayor and council meetings, but it is nice to come back to the place where I started, which was sitting out here in the audience with all of our constituents. So if you don't mind, can I say a few words?
Sure.
Thank you. So Chairman Cardin, on behalf of the town of Berlin and the entire Eastern Shore, I do want to thank you for bringing the United States Senate Committee on Small Business and Entrepreneurship field hearing to the town of Berlin and the Eastern Shore. I also want to thank Senator Van Hollen and Congressman Harris for taking the time to hear firsthand from the panel of witnesses that we have here today. Most importantly, I want to thank the witnesses for sharing your stories of resiliency and how you've weathered the most recent pandemic. And I want to thank all of you, the folks that are from the Eastern Shore and from the town of Berlin, many local faces that I recognize, for coming out to listen. Because I think, I said this a lot on the press interviews that we were doing before we came in here, I think we can learn a lot from each other, from the time that we get to hear from folks that are across the Eastern Shore that are going to share their stories with us today, to the stories that were shared on Main Street with Senator Cardin when we walked around. I think that exchange of information, that understanding of one another, I think helps us all. So I do appreciate that. I do want to recognize a few folks that are here at the local level. I want to start with our council members that I have from the town of Berlin. Councilmember Nur. Thank you. And then Councilmember Orris. And then we do have Ms. Carol Rose representing Senator Mary Beth Carose's office. Thank you. We have a local mayor, Mayor Pruitt from the mayor of Snow Hill, thank you. Mayor Mahoney from Chesapeake Beach, thank you. I'm a huge supporter of Berlin, we appreciate that. Mr. Clay Stamp from Talbot County. Clay? All right. And I think that's everybody on the, am I missing anyone? Okay. If I'm missing somebody, I apologize. So the focus of the hearing this afternoon is on small business resiliency. And I may be a bit biased, I am the mayor of the town of Berlin, but I don't think you can find a better place to showcase resiliency than right here in our small town. The town of Berlin is home to over 5,000 residents and more than 250 businesses. You wouldn't know that from driving down our main street. And serves as a tourism destination for folks from around the country. We're rich in history. We're known as the birthplace of Commodore Stephen Decatur. He's got once had a home right around the corner from where you gentlemen work, over at Lafayette Square, and was born here in the town of Berlin. So over Berlin's 155-year history, our residents and business community have done a tremendous job of preserving the architectural history of our town and adapting to the demands of our changing economy. This morning, prior to the hearing, Senator Cardin, Chairman Cardin, and I had the distinct honor of walking our downtown business district. Along our walk, I mentioned that the thriving business district that we see today was not always the case. As a lifelong resident of Berlin, I remember a time when the shop windows were not full and when we had numerous vacancies downtown. Lost my place. And when they weren't filled with energy of our hardworking business owners and their employees. I also remember a time when our sidewalks weren't packed, when you could actually walk down the sidewalks without having to navigate other folks. And I also remember a time when parking wasn't an issue in Berlin. So thankfully, our residents and business owners embraced change and leaned into the difficult challenges that come along with starting and growing businesses. To me, these are the qualities of resiliency and some of the most important qualities that make up such a cool and amazing small town like the town of Berlin. It truly is a great place to live, work, and visit. So in closing, I do want to thank all of our town of Berlin employees. Just raise your hands. Thank you. We have a bunch of them in attendance. Many of you don't know this, but that wall was not...
We heard the story about that. So we're responsible for the renovation of this place.
It's okay. It's a historic building. It comes with its challenges, but we had a substantial amount of water damage. Sujan, right up here on the stage from Senator Cardin's office, she did the walkthrough in the beginning, and she's like, you guys have this down. And then the next day, Cody, I don't know if he's in here from our Public Works, we were doing a couple things on the back wall, making things look pretty, and the whole wall came down. We have water damage and a substantial amount of water damage. So our folks worked diligently to make it look flawless in here today. So thank you to our town of Berlin employees. I also want to thank Chairman Cardin's staff for their hard work in transforming these council chambers that we use every second and fourth Monday into a satellite Senate hearing office, or hearing room. So we do appreciate that. And this is truly, I think, a first for the town of Berlin. So thank you, Chairman Cardin. Thank you, Senator Van Hollen and Congressman Harris. We appreciate it.
Mr. Mayor, once again, thank you for your hospitality. We know that it's a lot of work, and we appreciate it very much. And thanks for mentioning Sujan. I want to thank her for the work that she did in putting together this hearing. I want to thank Graham for his cooperation and help, because we worked together, both parties. Sebastian, thank you for your help. And, of course, Chief of Staff for the Small Business Committee, Sean Moore, is also with us. I have Carlton Atkinson, who's my state director, and Kim Cradaville, my regional director. If you have any problems after this hearing, Kim's the person to talk to. All right, so we have a really great group of witnesses today. Your full statements will be made part of the record. You may proceed as you wish. We ask that you try to summarize your comments in about 5 minutes or so. And then we'll have a chance to engage in conversation. We have Mrs. Cassandra Van Hooser, who's the Director of Economic Development and Tourism at Talbot County Government. We have Mr. John Nick Hargrove, sole member, owner, and operator of Tillman Island Seafood and Whitman Wharf Seafood in Tillman Island, Maryland. Mrs. Roxanne Wolf, Program Director, Shore Gourmet in Denton, Maryland. And Mr. Richard Loeffler, Business Consultant, Maryland Small Business Development Center, located, you're from Cambridge. I think the center is actually Salisbury, but you're from Cambridge. So we'll start with Mrs. Van Hooser.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chairman Cardin, Senator Van Hollen, and Congressman Harris. It's an honor to speak with you today about an issue of vital importance in the ever-changing landscape of today's economy. The dictionary defines resiliency as an ability to recover from or adjust easily to adversity or change. But few of us really need a dictionary to tell us what resiliency is. It's woven into our lexicon, and this is how we typically say it. You've got to roll with the punches. Get back on the horse. You can weather this storm. When life gives you lemons, make lemonade. But when we talk about business resiliency, it's far more than just getting back on a horse. It's being proactive, anticipating change, identifying and taking steps to mitigate risks, and reacting quickly to disruptions, all while keeping the doors open, employees productive, and revenue flowing. Economic development organizations play a critical role in building resiliency in the business community. Early in my career, I was surprised by an instructor who summarized the profession in 7 simple words. Economic developers are a conduit to resources. While that's largely true, our role is far more nuanced than that. Communities invest in economic development and tourism because we help businesses grow and succeed. We help remove obstacles that impede success, and we help businesses cultivate the strategic mindset that includes things like disaster preparedness, business continuity planning, and succession planning. We market the community to attract new businesses, new workers, and new visitors. And yes, we connect owners like Whitman Moore Seafood and Nick Hargrove to the resources they need to be successful. Examples of resource partners include the Small Business Administration, the Small Business Development Center. If I could clone Rich Loeffler, I would do it. USDA Rural Development, as well as state agencies. My resource partners are a force multiplier for the work that I do. There is no one-size-fits-all economic development plan, yet the pandemic underscored some foundational principles that define the work of an economic development professional. I could list many, but in the interest of time, I'm going to pick just one. Preparedness is the cornerstone of resiliency. People often fail to prepare for business disruptions because some things are just too scary to consider. That's human nature. But planning pays off for individuals, businesses, and communities, and not just for natural disasters and public health emergencies. Change in the business world can be just as disruptive as a natural disaster. The world can change overnight, but business owners and managers can deal with changes by being prepared. Communities must also be prepared to assist businesses when disruptions occur. Talbot County has integrated the business community into its emergency preparedness planning for many years. When the Department of Emergency Services created its first hazard mitigation and community resiliency plan, leaders asked this: what event could take us down as a community? The outcome of that process was the establishment of 5 community pillars: infrastructure, education, public health and safety, environment, and of course, economic stability. When the COVID-19 health emergency emerged, we already had a roadmap, and a plan to follow, and that roadmap included the business community. As economic developers, we also need tools that help us prepare for, monitor, and measure the impact of any crisis that affects businesses. I was fortunate enough to be part of a team that built an award-winning suite of tools that was funded by the EDA. Our Eastern Shore Economic Resiliency Toolkit includes dashboards, web mapping applications, interactive reports, and a dedicated web portal. 9 regional partners worked for 2 years on this project, and we continue to meet and collaborate. Today, we use the Eastern Shore Economic Resiliency Toolkit to help identify challenges and to assist in long-term planning and public policy development. Now, I'm scrapping my notes from here, and I'm going to end with the newspaper that I picked up on the way out of the hotel. So the headline here says, Hooper's fire fails to slow staff. Now, you're going to hear some stories of resiliency today, and these are my friends and partners. I'm not going to steal their thunder. But this story really underscored, I think, the essence of resiliency. This restaurant business in West Ocean City had a kitchen fire. They credit staff and community support for helping them get up and running in a timely fashion. But on page 8, the paper says this: Hoopers burned to the ground in a fire on January 29, 2002. And following that, the owners had put everything in place to make sure that nothing like that ever happened again. The restaurant reopened in one day. Yes, resiliency is a strategic imperative in an increasingly interconnected and unpredictable world. The businesses that survive and thrive will be those that master the principles of resiliency. Thank you for your time and your attention today, and I look forward to questions and conversation as we move forward.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Mr. Hargrove?
Yeah, sure. Good afternoon, gentlemen. My name is Nick Hargrove, and I'm a seafood processor right here on the Eastern Shore. I own 2 historic packing houses, one of them being the old Ray Jones packing house in Whitman, and I also own the Harrison Oyster House right on Tillman Island. Before I get rambling on about blue catfish, I'd like to thank Cassandra for all the help that she's given me. We started working together a little over a year ago when I purchased the Harrison Oyster House. Having already owned a packing house, we weren't real sure that this was the right step for us to go. But when asked to buy it, we decided that we were going to take the leap. And we figured out that this was probably going to be in the best interest of the community to make sure that the fishermen had a facility to work out of. Having no idea what it took to get an occupancy permit, I reached out to Cassandra for some guidance. Little did she know what she was getting into. But this is where our story began. As many of you know, the blue catfish has been a hot topic since our Governor Westmore asked for federal assistance in combating the invasive species. But that really wasn't always the case. The blue catfish has been swimming around in our water since the 70s and has been wreaking havoc on our ecosystem ever since. There's an estimated 150 million pounds currently swimming in our waters. I was a traditional seafood buyer and processor, buying and processing oysters in the winter, buying and processing crabs in the summer. After a terrible year in 2022 buying, selling, and picking crabs, we not only were exhausted, but we showed a loss for our efforts at the end of the season. Wondering how we were going to make this work and make the ends meet going into the 2022 oyster season, we knew we had to make a change. We wouldn't be able to keep the doors open and keep doing business as we were before. We decided that we would turn the old oyster house into a USDA certified blue catfish processing facility. I was approached by a gentleman who was a purchaser for the military. He told me that he purchased hundreds of thousands of pounds of blue catfish fillets a year and was having trouble meeting the demands of the military. He asked if he thought I could convert the packing house in Tillman to a catfish plant. After doing some homework and learning everything that would be required to get certified, we still weren't sure we could pull this off. But that same exact month, the 2022 Fall Crab Survey came out and showed the lowest number of crabs reported since they started doing the surveys back in 1990. The report showed only 227 million crabs were estimated, which may seem like a lot, but 10 years prior to that, there was an estimated 765 million crabs. I wanted to figure out where the crabs were going. All signs pointed back to the blue catfish. A pitcher started surfacing with blue catfish bellies full of dozens of crabs. This was really the straw that broke the camel's back for me. Being frustrated with the crab industry, concerned for my friends and my community that rely on the crabs for their livelihood, I knew we didn't have a choice. We had to become part of the solution and not the problem. The real work began. We started renovations on the building, put in a waterproof paneling, epoxy floor coatings, LED lightings, large coolers, freezers, purchasing insulated vats, trucks, boxes, label machines, ice machines, and reaching out to the fishermen in order to purchase their fish. We truly felt like a fish out of water by the end of the project. But we did it, and we began cutting in March. Fishermen were catching up to 70,000 pounds of fish a day, and we were hustling to keep up. Training my staff of oyster shuckers to learn to cut fish wasn't easy, and I obviously couldn't have done it alone. My plant manager, although doubtful this was a good idea, believed in me and started to follow our lead. We spoke for hours on processes and procedures that could help ramp up our production as the community looked on and wondered what we were doing and was this going to work. And quite frankly, they weren't the only ones. But we did it, and we started to get our feet under us. Things started to get easier. Orders started coming in, first 10,000 pounds, then 40,000 pounds, then standing orders for 80,000 pounds. We started to feel that we could pull this off and that we were starting to gain ground that we lost the summer before. We currently process 10,000 pounds of fish a day. We sell to the Maryland Food Bank, the Capital Food Bank, and we're helping to feed people in our community with food insecurities. We're helping to give kids food that they can have on the weekends when they aren't at school, and providing dozens of fishermen with market for their catch that they didn't have before. We have been able to keep the price of the fish high and stable, ensuring that the fishermen get fair prices for their catch and are compensated fairly for their hard work. We send catfish overseas to feed our troops and are working with a handful of other countries that are now interested in our product. Out of everything that I've done in the seafood industry, whether it was diving for oysters or fishing 900 crab pots a day, this has by far been the most rewarding and shows the most potential for growth. As I said earlier, I could not have done this alone. Whether it was Cassandra that helped me navigate the county or the staff that looked at me wide-eyed when I told them our plans to cut fish, they all believed in my vision and they stuck by our side. But we are not out of the woods yet. Unfortunately, cutting 15,000 pounds of fish a day won't solve the blue catfish problem. But we aren't finished either. We need to get with the 21st century and get equipment that we can ramp up our production so that we can meet the demands of our customers, allow us to hire more employees, as well as help save our ecosystem and our crab population at the same time. This will require more time and investment to achieve our goal, but at this point we have no choice. We will either sink or swim in this project. One of the questions I was supposed to answer is what everyone in this room can do that can help. I usually don't like asking for help unless I'm asking Cassandra for it, but I'd like to be part of the discussion when it comes to releasing the USDA requirement of the processing. Getting rid of the USDA could have a negative impact on our business. The USDA requirements allow us to sell our product to the military, the food banks, the prison systems, the school systems. Without this, we wouldn't be able to sell our product. On top of that, the USDA gives us grants and loans that help us grow our business. We have an opportunity to work with the USDA, maybe changing the regulations on catfish, putting them into their own category, away from meat and poultry. This would loosen the rules, but would still result in a safe product for the consumer, as well as keeping us eligible for federal assistance that the state is going to need in order to grow this industry. I'm honored to be here and given the opportunity to speak. I'm looking forward to the questions, and want to thank everyone and appreciate you guys supporting the fishing community. Thank you.
Thank you very much, not only for your testimony, but for what you're doing to help our community. Ms. Wolf.
Thank you. Senator Van Hollen, Chairman Cardin, Congressman Harris, it is an honor to actually be here to talk about. It's really interesting. I'm supposed to be here to talk about converting poultry houses, but the Shore Gourmet bus, we've worked on blue catfish. It's a system down here, and that's what I'm here to talk about today, networking and how we need to network for small business. Choose somebody's skill set, choose somebody else's, and get a better assembly line going so that it can be grown and that it can be put out to market. As Governor Wes Moore has said recently, Maryland is asset-rich and strategy-poor. I hope to address some of this in the discussion on Maryland's two economic drivers, agriculture and seafood. And agriculture, of course, is a major driver throughout the United States. So I feel like I'm speaking for all farmers today. When I first took on the role of project manager for Shore Gourmet, the research in looking for value-added products and economic development drivers was eye-opening. At my first board meeting with Shore Gourmet with Beth Brewster, Executive Director of Chesapeake Culinary Sister, and she's my sister too, by the way, and with Scott Warner, Midshore Regional Council, there were a few things that stood out. I come from pharmaceutical. You got to research it before you take a look at what you're going to do. So what were some of the issues? Farmers want to farm, watermen's want to fish. That's it, right? That's it. Processing, aggregation, and adequate storage through freezing, dehydration, and freeze drying were not sufficient for the demands. There was a systemic void from the harvester to the end user in the private sector and government entities. Domestic products were few and far between, and profitable products like specialty mushrooms, herbs, and other nutraceutical crops. An onslaught of products were coming from Asia or South America. Consumers prefer and will pay for domestic and local products that we can grow here. There was not a central internet platform for large business. Maryland's Best is now being remodeled to address this issue, but somebody needed 400 acres of oregano. There wasn't a button for me to hit so that we could get a bunch of farmers together to say, can you bid on this? But I wanted contracts. So that's how that started, that we needed something that was more, how do we get a lot of small businesses to be able to push a button and be able to be able to address that? And every state should have that. Some states do. There was not a group of farmers that worked together to brand a niche crop. If you take a look at Maine, you think about Maine blueberries are all over the place. Wisconsin cheese, Georgia peaches, we have got to brand Maryland, and each state should brand what they want, so you're looking forward to having that product. The threats to our farmers, when we were taking a look at it, some farmers were losing their contracts or they were being minimized with the poultry and nursery industry. That's a big problem in Maryland. Farmers need help in changing their business model to diversify and bring innovation and technology into their farms. Climate change. Invasive species consuming traditional Chesapeake seafood. During COVID, lack of regional fresh and stored produce and protein came to a crescendo. The cost of farming has increased with shortages and the transportation to get staples like equipment, feed, and fertilizer. With all this going on in the Ukraine and Russia, we have a fertilizer problem. But quite honestly, we can compost blue catfish, and that can be part of the solution to that, by the way. Silos exist between the sectors of the system to get profitable, diversified harvests to market both domestically and internationally. Several projects that Sura Gourmet is working on highlight the need for developing a strategy rich in systems approach to developing and expanding small business. Today we'll talk about bacon poultry houses. Controlled environment agriculture, so we're not just talking about poultry houses. When we took on the project, it was a pilot. But controlled environment agriculture, because of climate change, is a wave of the future. But also, what are we going to do with these poultry houses? We have over 1,000 just in Maryland, that's not Delmarva, just in Maryland, where they've lost their contracts, and these buildings are still in good condition. So Maryland was having a little bit of an issue with it initially. They didn't want to certify them to do anything else. So we worked with University of Delaware and actually have a protocol, which I'm happy to send to you, from University of Delaware, how to abate the bacteria from that poultry house to make it a usable site. We were really fortunate to be able to get a TEDCO grant that allowed us after that to be able to, what can we grow in there, pilot. So we just got done the pilot. We did raised bed agriculture, we did hydroponics, aeroponics, and we did aquaponics. And we are successfully growing spirulina, which is a huge nutraceutical that primarily is coming from overseas, and the processing practices over there are questionable. So with that, we need to really start taking a look, not just with the poultry houses, and poultry houses can be a lot of things, but I'm hoping we can take what we did in the poultry house, malls, greenhouses, any space that is vacant, we should be growing in, because I think we have seen, we also have a food pantry. We were not resilient at all. We were very fortunate to be sealing meals for over 2,000 folks in Caroline County because we had started doing some of that for some of our school children. But the problem was because we didn't have storage and we didn't have dehydration. We generally try to use as much local product as possible because farmers are our consumers. The working poor, when we take a look at the working poor, the county that I'm working in, it's 29% working poor. A lot of them are farmers. And so what are we going to do to be able to help them? It costs a little bit more to have local product, but it's certainly more nutritious. And the fact that our county was able to serve 2,000 meals 5 days a week to seniors and children, if we would have had local product, how could we have helped our local businesses at that time? We kept 42 cafeteria workers employed during that time when everybody else was laying their folks off because they were sealing meals for our community. If we just would have had more local product. It would have been beautiful if we would have had more storage, more aggregation, more distribution, but that's a problem that we continue to have here. So developing these aggregation processing centers with drying capabilities for both produce and for fish, I think is critical. We need more adequate temperature-controlled storage through either government facilities or the private sector, financing, rebates, and avenues to pay for these conversions to controlled environment agriculture, energy conservation programs that address the high energy costs that farmers are experiencing in these buildings. That's the game stopper right now that we found with the pilot. Energy conservation, and depending upon if a farmer is in, a lot of these farmers who have lost their contracts are not in financial good standing. So what do we do to be able to help them to be able to do that and grow a business? Aligning producers with government and institutional buyers. I know with the blue catfish, we initially had a little bit of a problem with that, but how do we have USDA products that are just on procurement and can be sold out? Why do we have to find these people? It should be an easy kind of a thing for us to be sell to the military or to be able to sell to institutions. Developing a system to brand certain products. And maybe like with Maryland, maybe we do become Maryland made or grown with specialty, maybe we become the nutraceutical capital of the world. Wouldn't that be a beautiful thing? Because let's face it, food is medicine. Kevin Addix, our Secretary of Agriculture, is definitely into that. And we've got to have more nutritious food, because part of the problem is we're running into, we know we have a problem with the soil. And what are we going to do about that? We're not getting as many vegetables as we did before because of the soil makeup. We have to start taking, and what I really found was when we have a problem, instead of we need to start looking as an opportunity. We have a problem like a poultry house, or we have a saltwater infiltration that has grown by 2 times, 2013 to 2017. We can grow crops there, or we can there's a multitude of things, but we're always reactive and not proactive for our farmers. How are we going to help them address those issues, but also keep our community sound and be able to be resilient with food? We were not food resilient. I have a backpack program with 700 kids. This is no joke. When you can't get ramen noodles for 19 cents, there's a problem. But we couldn't get fruits and vegetables for our kids. So it was a huge problem locally to be able to get those products because we're transporting so much in. Shore Gourmet has worked with the farmhouse in Ridgely. Verlina is the spirulina name for that. To execute the bacterial abatement and growing modalities for different crops. It can be done, but we have to get farmers to start thinking a little bit outside and help them to show them the way to say, you're going to grow spirulina, it's going to go to this aggregator processor, and then it's going out. And that's part of the systems problem that we have. In conclusion, Maryland has a wealth of products and produce that can be an economic driver for small and startup businesses. Being proactive with solutions to problems like vacant space, saltwater infiltration of farms, crops can be grown, and invasive species can turn into profit centers. Let's not look at it as problems. Federal and state agencies can be part of the solution in developing strategies between small business, the private sector, and state and federal government to develop a systems approach to developing and expanding entrepreneurs in profitable harvests on land and sea. In addition, address food resiliency in a profitable way to create jobs, new businesses, and provide consumers with the products that they need. So thank you so much for having me. It's been very exciting to work on these projects. We've seen some of the problems and are trying to come up with solutions, but it'd be really nice if, like I said, the saltwater thing, we got to start reacting to it now. The blue catfish, we're behind the times. The controlled environment agriculture, we've got to start converting your malls, even whether it's urban or rural. So hopefully we can start being a little bit more proactive and not reactive.
Thank you for your testimony. You've given us a lot of food for thought.
Sorry.
Mr. Loeffler.
Okay, hopefully you can hear me. Thank you, Commissioner Cardin and other members of the committee, Senator Van Hollen, House Representative Mr. Andy Harris. I thank you for allowing me to share some thoughts that are coming from the perspective of a former small business owner. I had been in business and working with the Maryland Small Business Development Center for a number of years as I was in business. So I got to know the programs and some of the people in it. A little bit about me, though, before I go farther. I was born and raised in New Jersey and moved to Maryland on the Eastern Shore for business purposes. I eventually became a partner in the venture and spent about 20-plus years as a business owner. When I chose to sell out my shares, we had about $50 million in annual sales. We were employing about 250 people, and at that particular moment, we were right in the process of buying out our biggest competitor. They were going to triple the size of the business. The business remains today a major supplier of metal conveyor belting on the world stage. Since retiring as a small business owner, I've spent over 20 years now working with the Maryland SBDC. I've worked with many businesses that showcased great resiliency in the face of adversity. One that comes to mind is a restaurant that was doing exclusive dining room service when the pandemic turned their world upside down. They quickly pivoted and developed a takeout menu. They worked hard to make it easy for their customers to place and pick up their orders efficiently. They even created outdoor seating that pioneered safe social distancing for those who still wanted a restaurant service experience. Another client I worked with that has shown the ability to pivot is a distribution business that was struggling to compete with tightening margins and large competitors taking more market share in the region. Over several years, they worked on refining their business model with ongoing counseling. They switched from focusing on distribution to growing their fulfillment services and add new product consulting. They also added some niche manufacturing to help grow their business revenues and increase their margins. This business continues to engage with our services and is constantly looking for new opportunities to grow and prosper. In both cases, what helped these clients remain resilient was they learned to pay attention to their business models through ongoing engagement with trusted local counseling. They were working with someone who really understood their unique business models and provided advisement that was professional and compassionate. Each developed their own key success indicators in their business planning process and tracked performance to measure the success of their strategies. It was a willingness by these clients to continuously learn and engage with the SBDC and other valuable resource partners in the community that made the difference. What can be done to make more rural businesses resilient? I honestly believe investing in rural SBDCs is part of the answer. We get to know our clients with individualized attention and can provide the ongoing support that businesses need to grow. Our counseling helps clients with limited financial education learn to pay attention to their key success indicators. We also help them think about contingencies in the business planning process, and we understand the importance of developing productive relationships with resource partners like insurance agents, banks particularly, and other support relationships. Having someone who is not involved in the day-to-day operations also gives them access to an external perspective that is invaluable to any business that hopes to grow. Our services remain one of the best-kept secrets, though, in the business community. They just don't know who small business development centers are. Another factor that is going to impact resiliency is access to longer-term capital. The clients who have the resources to invest in their plans to pivot are going to be the clients that succeed. As the saying goes, lenders will gladly give you an umbrella when it's sunny outside, but they will ask for it back the moment it starts to rain. Businesses that are facing challenges can rarely get traditional financial support or support from federally guaranteed loan programs. Businesses in these situations are often confronted with predatory financing with high interest rates and no options for prepayment or restructuring. Businesses that fall into the trap of subscribing to these types of financing tend to be the businesses that will ultimately fail. Replicating some of the lessons learned from successful economic injury disaster loans, EIDLs, during COVID may be helpful. So many of our clients were saved during the pandemic by being able to spread their investment over a longer period and at a reasonable interest rate. There was also a relatively easy underwriting process for EIDL loans as the country worked to recover from the pandemic. Yet, now, this capital is only available if there is a disaster declaration. Small businesses that need to pivot are not always in regions where there are official federal emergencies declared. Furthermore, traditional EIDL loans have much tighter underwriting requirements. Perhaps developing a rural loan program that is based on similar income capacity as the COVID-era EIDL would support greater resiliency for businesses that need to develop a pivot strategy. Thank you for letting me share this testimony and for your efforts to support rural businesses.
Mr. Walther, thank you for your testimony. The reason I really enjoy doing regional hearings, it allows us to take a case study and really drill down and see how we can apply the policies we do in Washington to deal with the practical challenges. And here we're dealing with small businesses and rural communities and their resiliency, and I think the Eastern Shore really does present to us a good case study for how to do this. Mr. Hargrove, I want to thank you for the motivation for the start of your business. It was the juvenile crabs inside of the catfish that motivated you that we had to do something to save the crab population in Maryland. And as the mayor and I went to stores today, we went and Love Your Mama, which shows you that sustainability is an important goal. I think you said this, Mrs. Wolf, that you want to have invasive species profit centers. Well, we have sustainable products profit centers. Or we went to the June and Joyce, and we saw where we can have food, farm to food, healthy foods as a sustainable profit centers. So this is what small businesses do, and I just really want to underscore that importance. I want to talk about catfish for one moment, and I appreciate your comments on the USDA. Our challenge with the USDA is that they have no experience in dealing with wild-caught seafood. They do deal with the catfish from farm-raised, but not with wild. They don't have that experience within the department. So that's one of the reasons we have been concerned about the regulatory framework. And I think your suggestion for separate categories is really a very strong point. Yes, we want to turn it into a profit center, but we also recognize there's a cost of getting rid of invasive species. We saw that with the nutria population here on the Eastern Shore, where we were able to eradicate the nutrias, but there was a significant investment of resources in order to do that. So it seems to me if there's some way we can combine the resources for eradication with marketing the product for economic viability, tack it from both sides, we can make stronger progress. So I just really want you to talk a little bit more about the profit center here and what we can do to make it a more profitable industry. I want to thank Steve Umberger. He had catfish last night for dinner. How do we promote that more often?
Blue catfish.
Blue catfish.
Yeah, certainly. So right now, currently, we are doing it the old-fashioned way. We are cutting fish by hands with knives, like you've seen it done for hundreds of years. If you go on the internet and you look up processing plants for fish, you would think that you were looking at a NASA building. There is equipment out there that can allow us where we're processing probably around, I'd say, 1,500 pounds an hour. With some proper equipment, we can bump it up to about 6,000 pounds an hour. And I think this is one of the ways to get the cost down on the fish that can bring up the profit. There's countries, here in Maryland, catfish is kind of a new fish. If you put catfish on the menu next to rockfish, 90% of people are going to eat the rockfish. But I went to school down in North Carolina, and I can tell you that people down there rather eat the catfish than the rockfish. So although it's a new fish for the menus around here, people also associate the fish with being cheap or not a good eating fish. Using the words sustainable and wild caught are better than invasive, is what we found out. You know, nobody wants to eat something invasive, sounds like foreign, and people don't want to eat a foreign fish. So I think the marketing technique, you know, can be altered in different ways that we can also get more money for it. I sell catfish to the mom and pop store down the road that makes a really good fish sandwich. I also sold it to Perry Cabin. We've dry aged it. We've put it on the menus, high-end menus. So it's a very diverse fish. But you know, the ways of marketing, then we can certainly come up with ways that can be more profitable for everybody. The more that we can get for it on the backside, the more we can pass the profits off to the fishermen along the way.
I'm sure that in the Perry Cabin's charging a lot more than that store down the road. Ms. Wolf?
Yeah, well, right now, just to let you know, we have taken the blue catfish and we are trying to get it a recipe approved by the USDA so that it can be served in all the schools. It's sitting on their desk right now. So that therefore our kids can get, we have to call it a seafood cake, not a blue catfish cake. We actually had our kids test it, but, you know, and they said, yeah, it's got to be a seafood cake. So we'll call it poor man's crab cake.
The problem with USDA, as we see it, is that they don't know how to handle this.
No.
So they're thinking about the foods that they regulate rather than wild-caught seafood.
Right. And so that's why if we can get it approved for schools, we've tested it at Maryland schools, and people are ready for it, and do some other value-add kind of things by smoking it. People down south will buy it. And so we're looking for a lot of value add to what Nick is doing, and that's it. It's getting somebody like a Nick, getting it to a value add, and then making it much more profitable for everybody along the food chain.
Mr. Loeffler, you mentioned the capital availability during COVID by the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program. Eligibility. It took a congressional act to make it eligible. We had to pass as the first COVID-related piece of legislation for small business was to make it eligible for idle loans as a result of COVID-19. So we don't really have a good disaster program to deal with the unpredictables. We do for fires and things like that, but not for the unpredictable things that are occurring. So we really do need, you mentioned for rural areas, one of the things that we've been looking at, there are some direct loans under disaster available by SBA, but perhaps trying to find a niche for rural, smaller loans under an EIDL type program might be a way where we can start looking at a different way to handle the gap that you see. Talk a little bit more about this gap.
Well, what typically happens is that when the small business owner goes out to get a loan, he's unable to get it because of either his size or his capacity to be able to pay it back in a short period of time. What we need is a place that we can go that says, okay, we know this isn't the rocket science stuff. This is down to earth. How do we make this happen for you? And it might mean that we look at collateral a little bit differently for them. It might say, instead of saying it's got to be 110 or 150% collateralized, maybe we got to say we can live if there's only 75% of it is collateralized. But it's the idea to make the money available to these additional people that typically are not going to be able to borrow money from some of the other existing larger banks. Again, rural communities, the banks treat people differently, but these new requirements that have come out in the last number of years for how much capital the banks have to have for the amount of loans they're going to have, that's made it difficult for some of the smaller banks to continue lending to our clients who are working in these businesses developing them. It comes down to, are we able to get it? It's going to be X amount of time to do it, and then you're going to have a very short period of time to pay it back. They need longer terms. They need the ability to just get some money. They don't have the cushion that the other businesses, maybe that are large-scale businesses, have. So one of the things that I personally ask our small business owners to get, if they're going to be in business, I say, get in business, have your business loan, but let's also get a line of credit. I can't tell you when something's going to happen, but I know, meeting the businesses, from having been in my own business for quite a number of years, if you don't have something set aside, when that, whatever it is that's going to hits, you're really scrambling. So let's get some of this set up in advance, get banks that are willing to work with these people, and let's get some of that money out to them so that the businesses can stay here and grow.
Good advice. Mrs. Van Hooser, you talked about adapting, because you're going to have to adapt to unforeseen issues that are going to happen, as Mr. Loeffler is talking about. How strong are our resource partners in helping small businesses plan for the unexpected?
So it's sort of an individual case. You know, individually, I work with the Small Business Development Center. I refer clients to them, and we work on those things where we lay out the business plan and include that in the business plan. So I don't want to throw any partners under the bus, but you know, I would say that since COVID, you know, grants and loans now require resiliency to be addressed. And they require that for government organizations. The EDA requires it. So, you know, we're now beginning to really think of resiliency as something that you need to plan for. I think we're beginning to do a better job at that. I think what's really important for our community, for businesses like Nick, is that it continues to build on our seafood industry. It gives our watermen additional work to do, and you know, helps our culture, and it builds the fabric of the community. And the more we can help our businesses plan for unexpected things, the more strong we are in that, and the better our communities are. So,
thank you. Senator Van Hollen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank all of you for your testimony. I learned a lot, and I appreciate all of you bringing your experience to bear on these questions. And I have one set of questions, I think, for Ms. Van Hooser. Van Hooser. We're both CVH, as we discussed.
That's right.
Ms. Wolf and Ms. Loeffler, and then I do have a question for you, Mr. Hargrove. Ms. Van Hooser, in terms of the array of federal programs, you've got the SBA program, loan programs, as well as EDIL. You have various programs under the Department of Commerce, mostly grant programs like EDA programs. Mm-hmm. You have the Department of Ag programs. All of them have certain focuses. I guess my question to you is, here on the Eastern Shore, in your experience, what have been the most useful federal programs, and do you have ideas, as Mr. Loeffler suggested, as how we might sort of reshape them? I'm not talking right now about the array of COVID programs, although there may be some lessons we can learn. In my talking to people around the state, including the Eastern Shore, those programs were effective at accomplishing the goal. The PPP program, several iterations we worked through, but these were very helpful in helping bridge that terrible period. But as you look to the future, which of those federal programs do you find most useful for your purposes, and would you change them in any particular ways? And I have the same question for Ms. Wolf, and maybe Mr. Loeffler, you've answered with EDIL, but if you have any other thoughts, I'd appreciate it.
So I think our businesses are not looking for a handout, they're looking for a hand up. And so the programs that we use the most are SBA loans and rural development, you know, for the energy programs, we, you know, refer based, you know, case by case. So, you know, I think programmatically, you know, for us, you know, we could use some additional assistance in that. The EDA loans for tourism, for example, under the ARPA funds, we were able to access those through the state to have additional product development and programming for tourism, and that was some flexibility that we've never had before. So I think that if I were going to change anything, I would look at that. So.
Okay, thank you. As well.
I think some of the, well, for the folks I'm dealing with the poultry houses, many of them are not in good standing. And as a matter of fact, like with the TEDCO grant, we had to go to another farmer to work with this one because they weren't in good standing. They want to keep their businesses, and so how do we take particularly contractual folks? My whole thing with, hey, if you're going to lose your contract, then the chicken industry really should, abating bacteria is about $50,000. Somebody who's losing their contract can't afford that. So can we go back to the chicken folks and say, hey, you're going to, but you've got to get rid of this because it's an environmental issue afterwards. You know, so should they take on some of that so that they, because some of the contract loss is for what, there is a reason. It's very easy to get out of a contract with the chicken and the nursery industry. So I think the thing is, but also I know that when we do the value add, we send them to have just a whole, send them to Richard, send them to Cassandra to have, how do we get this thing started? But also to, as you know, with the processing, to be able to say, hey, let the government get involved with this invasive species, the sustainable wild-caught invasive species, and be able to say, we have a way of doing it down south with the farm, with the catfish farm, in order to, and they have those, and they're just cranking them out. We've got to start taking a look at doing some of that up here for not only the blue catfish, but also dehydration, freeze drying. Other countries are doing that. I've been, my husband is Japanese, I'm in Japan a lot of freeze drying. A lot of dehydration, so that therefore you can just rehydrate because they don't have all the freezing storage capacity. But we can do it here, but we have to be able to have a seamless thing where a farmer is going right to the processor, getting paid, and move on. It can't be all this waiting for money and things like that. So I think for me that's, we have to come up with a better network and systems approach to it.
Thank you. Mr. Love.
I would think, as we move forward, if we could do something that was especially prepared for the rural areas, that would help us tremendously. Again, we've got somebody that's thinking a mom and pop shop in the rural area, and maybe they're going to employ 5 or 6 people total, all right, over the span. When you go to the major metropolitan area, you're going to have a business that maybe is coming in because of transportation, numbers of people. They're going to employ 200 people. What do we know today? How do you find people, right? If you can find 6 in the rural community, maybe that's a great way to do it. And you've got somebody here with 6 people. It's going to be an ongoing business. It's going to act differently. It's going to work differently. If you can build a 200-person business, and you can take instead a 5 or 6 person business, but yet they're still employing people, they're making themselves money, they're moving this forward. You can make some things happen, and that's what I think we're really trying to look for, is get it to the people that need it, where it's not quite as accessible as it is when you go into that mainstream community.
Got it. Understood. Thank you. So, Mr. Hargrove, thank you for all you're doing on the blue catfish side. I think you described the situation, as I understand it, very well. So you raised the question about the Department of Agriculture process, right? And how you're working with them. And I guess one question is, vis-a-vis Department of Agriculture, and as I know you know, FDA, is there a benefit into streamlining the review process somehow, whether it's the way you're saying it under Department of Ag, where you have a special provision for blue catfish, or whether you move it to FDA's? To what extent is that slow down the process compared to the lack of investment? Sounds like you're like the guy right now. And as I understand it, you said that we are catching about 70,000 pounds of blue catfish a day. Is that, do I have that right? And that right now you have the capacity of processing 10,000 pounds of catfish a day. So that's 60,000 pounds of catfish that are not being processed. You mentioned these new machines that could do up to 6,000 pounds per hour. So my question is in terms of increasing the catch of blue catfish, right? And making them, you know, more available and taking out more of the catfish out of the bay so that crabs can flourish more. What is the major hang-up here? Because part of the story, at least as I understand it, was the delay caused by the Department of Agriculture's review. And part of it, obviously, is just the fact that we don't have all the capital machinery in here to process. Can you just talk about your vision for how we can really address this issue? Because I think all of us have come to the conclusion that we have to eat our way out of this problem. And I agree with you on the branding. It's like, you know, whoever named this snakefish, you know, no one wants to eat snakefish. But just in terms of the accelerating our catch of bluefish, processing them on time, getting them to market, what's our major bottleneck right now?
Yeah, so certainly I work with the FDA as well as the USDA. The FDA does all my oysters and my crab processing, and I have all the faith in the world that they can obviously regulate the catfish processing safely enough. But what comes along with it, I hem and hawed, and I believe Mr. Andy Harris probably heard from me in the beginning when I was pushing back trying to get my facility USDA approved. The regulations are so much stricter with the USDA. I mean, I couldn't have a piece of rust in the building the size of a pencil eraser. So it costs us hundreds of thousands of dollars to convert these existing packing houses into something that meets the requirement of the USDA. That's something that not everybody can do, and it's definitely going to limit the amount of people that can get into the processing side of it. There is no shortage of catfish. Like you said, I've had fishermen that catch 70,000, upwards of 100,000, one fisherman a day. But he begs me, send 2 trucks, send 3 trucks, send 4 trucks. No, put 10,000 pounds on my truck and I'll come back tomorrow, you know, because you can only handle so much. And so I am only one of 2 processors here on the Eastern Shore. I think there's a small handful of ones over on the Western Shore, larger companies with more capital. We are not limited to where we can sell this fish. This fish is processed and frozen, has months worth of shelf life on it, and quite frankly, it's a very popular fish in almost every continent on the earth around here. People want the fish. So I work with the USDA inspector. She's at my facility every morning before I can process. They do a walkthrough of the facility, make sure it's clean, and then they stay there while I'm processing the fish. And we talk all the time. I had a guy, she was out one time, and we had a poultry guy come from one of the chicken plants, and he came down, and he said, "What are you guys doing? We need to take temperature samples every hour from every fish cleaning station." And we were like, if that's what we have to do, we'll do it, but we haven't been told to do that up until now. We got audited by the military, and they take a piece of the fish and they do nutrient tests on it. They look for any kind of harmful chemicals or something in it. And the inspector came back and said, "What kind of catfish is this?" And of course, you know, the company that I sell to was like, "Well, it's wild caught blue catfish." They said, "This is the best catfish we've ever tested." And they were used to buying fish from the farms down south.
Yep.
Right. And so we have a product that can't be compared to a channel fish that's grown into a pond with millions of its colleagues.
Yep.
And, you know, and so although it's labeled a catfish, it's certainly not a catfish that's raised in a pond. And so really, after being in the business now and going through all the hoops of the USDA, I think it is important that we have that on it. For one, when you're selling a fish overseas, the U.S. brand is very popular. People consider the U.S. quality products, and gives them the sense of security, especially when it comes to a catfish, where people in the past, you know, they have a fish over there that's very similar. It's called swai, and it's, you know, who knows if the government ever tested any of that fish, what would come up, because there's no regulations on it, and quite frankly, they don't have the consumer confidence that we have by putting the USDA label on it. So I think the key to it is, and I speak with my inspector about it all the time, is maybe having a separate category within the USDA that allows there to be some flexibility. We don't get salmonella on the fish. We don't puncture the guts or the bellies of the fish like is done at slaughterhouses. But as of right now, the only regulations that they have on catfish are coming from these cesspons from the south. Yep. And we really think that we should be in a category of our own. And even the USDA inspector will agree. I have they take a sample of my fish every week and send it off to get tested. And we've never had it come back with any pollutants or antibiotics or E. coli. It's a list of Latin names a mile long on there that they test for. And so I think that we really stand alone, and I think that we should have our own category with the department. And I think that the department does. It offers a lot of assistance, and sometimes the state can't. You know, we with the USDA, if you look at the loans and the grants that are available through the USDA, it's a lot more vast. It's refrigeration, it's trucks, it's low interest loans, and a lot more higher value on the loans. So I think there's a middle line there that I think that we can work with the USDA, and then I had another option that maybe it's not important that everybody is USDA. Maybe some facilities can be USDA and some can be FDA. But I know for me personally, I'd like to keep the USDA certification on my box because it opens up the doors and the avenues that I need in order to sell that much volume of fish to be produced.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Congressman Harris.
Thank you very much, and I do want to thank all of you for testifying today, and again to Senator Cardin for calling the hearing. You know, Ms. Wolf, I think you hit it on the head. I mean, we've got to brand things. I mean, you know, when value added is very important. Sure, look, we're good. We're pretty efficient at raising commodity poultry, but that's not the only thing that we're going to. That's not the only thing of economic value on the shore. I think branding goes a long way toward that. But we do have Maryland crab meat. I mean, if you go to other parts, people who've been to Maryland or this part of the country, they do look for things like that. Ms. Van Hoosen, let me just ask you a question. With the development, the economic development teams in various counties, they're important because I think a lot of smaller businesses don't know how to deal with, in this case, a federal agency. So, you know, I was in Princess Anne last week, met with a poultry processor, a new poultry processor on the shore. I didn't really realize there was one. But their niche, talk about branding, is halal processing. So they're doing about 7,000 pounds of chicken a day. They can do a whole lot more. And the gentleman came up to me and said, you know, but we had that program in the ARP for small processing plants. We sent our paperwork in. We haven't heard back. So this is, how often does this happen? That in fact what you're running up against is you have small businesses, and look, they don't have, you know, I always joke about this with community banks. You know, you go to a big bank somewhere, they have a whole floor of people dealing with regulators. Like literally a whole floor. You go, 5th floor, yeah, that's our regulatory floor. You go to a small business or a small community bank, they don't have anybody with an expertise in that. Is that what an organization like yours brings to the table? The ability to help people interact with agencies that can help them? Well,
it is. That connection to resources is not just money. That is, you know, people resources as well. So, you know, if we have a problem that we can't solve, we'll call Kimberly Cradaville or Alyssa Hastings or Mike Arns or Keith Graffius. We call your people. And, you know, I would say the bulk of the calls that I get from a business begin with a problem of some sort. So Nick needed help with something, he called me. Now we work together. I, you know, have him on speed dial. He has me on speed dial. So, you know, but as you say, the bulk of them begin with a problem. And so I begin to work my network to see what we can find to resolve that problem. And a lot of times it is an agency, either a state agency or a federal agency.
Yes, so I hope we can do that better, because again, you know, and Mr. Loeffler, I think you'd probably agree. I mean, the small businesses really have to deal differently and have very different resources to deal with it. Mr. Harder, let me just follow. Obviously, the blue catfish is a huge problem. Just a question about the machines, because I'm curious about that, because I heard about them. But my understanding is they work for the farm-raised because they're all the same size, more or less. So, but do the new machines, because when you have wild caught, you know there's a range of sizes. Do the new machines actually can process a range of sizes as well?
Well, sure. There is really two different size groups that are an issue with the machines. The catfish is much more of a horizontal fish, which means that the head is kind of horizontal, where a lot of the processing machines are made for vertical fish. And so it's a separate machine. There's a company called Morel that makes the equipment, and they deal with a lot of the larger processors in the South. So there's two separate machines. One machine can handle the 1 to 2 pound fish, and then the other ones can handle about 2 to about a 15-pound fish. Okay. And so there is a wide range. Here, there's fish, we've had fish up to 60 pounds in our plants before. They would still need to be hand cut or used for other things. Like you said, all of our waste goes to dog food processors. A lot of the heads will go down to the South for the crab industry down there. There's even a company in Florida that we're sending fish to make fertilizer out of it. So it's like a zero waste plant. Really, just the blood that goes down the drains is the only bit of the product that's not being used. But yes, there is equipment out there to answer your question. There's headers and gutters, there's filleters, and there's skinning machines. And one of the most important ones is the portion machine, because a lot of these contracts will give you a 2-ounce variance in where they want them, say 4 to 6 ounce or 6 to 8 ounce. And you have to be within that measure. We're currently doing it by eye right now. And it takes a special person to sit there all day and decide where to cut a fish to get a 4-ounce and a 6-ounce portion out of it. And obviously, there's some other pieces of machinery that you're going to need to get into retail. There's skin packagers that put a thin layer of plastic over the fish, makes it more appealing to the eye. And so there's definitely more equipment out there that can also make different products for you as well.
Well, thank you. You know, part of the resilience is actually to keep our companies viable, because you got to be viable to be resilient. You still process crabs?
I don't.
You don't do it anymore. But you're familiar with the people in your industry who have problems with getting H-2B workers, right?
Oh, every day.
And the disappointment during COVID was that it wasn't COVID that caused those plants on Hooper Island to close down. Mm-hmm. It was the lottery in H-2B.
Yeah.
Where a small business, can't afford a year when they get no one. Mm-hmm. And the person across the street gets everybody because they, quote, won the lottery, right, which the U.S. government ran. How important are temporary workers to the economy, and you all can answer this, to the Eastern Shore economy in terms of making sure that we have the ability to get temporary foreign workers when we just don't have, because the labor supply and the workforce is always an issue on the shore. How important is it that we have access to temporary foreign workers? Any one of you who...
I know from our personal, I'm in the seafood industry, and a lot of my friends don't get their pickers every year. And it, to me, is insane that we're allowing this to go on. And how can someone base a business off of someone picking their name out of a hat in order to make sure that they have them? And honestly, it really is heartbreaking. These people have been with them for dozens of years. They're like family to you. When you spend more time with the people at work than you do your own family sometimes in this industry, you make a very close bond with them. And I can't imagine what it's like for the people on the other end that aren't allowed to come here and work at the facility that provides for their livelihoods, and quite frankly, probably the families on either side of their households back in these countries. And we're to the point where we don't even rely on the H-2 visas anymore, unfortunately. It enables the growth of your company to think, that one day you're going to have your girls and then the next year you're not. So we try to pick from the local help, which is obviously everybody knows is getting tougher and tougher, especially the jobs that are required in the seafood industry. They're not always the most glamorous jobs. They're really, you need to need real grit to get through it sometimes. And without this problem getting solved, I really wonder what's going to happen with the crab industry, especially.
No,
And
thank
it's
you.
not just seafood, it's also tourism.
Yep.
I think we've come and seen Mr. Daniel in your office every year and talk about this. The Inn at Perry Cabin, for example, has always counted on that type of labor. It's particularly prevalent in Ocean City, so it's very helpful to the tourism industry for that to be a reliable source. Also, on a seasonal basis, it works well for the seasonal workers. So it's important to tourism as well.
Well, thank you. And Nick, just one last question, which I thought of as you were speaking, wild-caught fish in general. I mean, the problem with the farm raised is they do have issues with quality.
Sure.
And one thing we did in the agriculture appropriations bill is suggest that, wild-caught invasive species might be handled differently, but maybe wild-caught's the most important part of that. That in fact, that maybe, and we'll ask the USDA and perhaps the GAO to look into whether or not, a wild-caught farm-raised distinction might be one of the ways we might deal with some of those issues. Again, and I love it, sustainable wild-caught. It sounds so much better than invasive. I yield back. Thank you.
Well, let me thank all of you again. And Ms. Van Hooser, thank you for mentioning Alyssa Hastings, who's here, who's our eyes and ears on Eastern Shore, mine when I can't be here. So along with the representatives from Senator Cardin and Congressman Harris. Mr. Mayor, thank you and the council for allowing us to claim the dais up here for a little while. Very much appreciated.
You're welcome every second and fourth Monday.
All right, I got it. Thank you. And this is bringing back some memories during my college days. For 2 summers in a row, I went up and worked in Alaska on in a fish processing plant on what we call the slime line. Slitting the fish, worked my way up to the Iceman and forklift driver, but it is an industry that is essential to Maryland. And we've actually, speaking of Alaska, Senator Cardin and I have teamed up with Senator Murkowski from Alaska and Senator Sullivan from Alaska, because when it comes to the H-2B visa issue and seafood, they have similar concerns and pressures. So we are working as part of the Farm Bill, along with Congressman Harris, who's been working on this on the House side, both the H-2B visa issue as well as the blue catfish issue. So we look forward to continuing those efforts. And let me finally thank again Ben Cardin, Senator Cardin, for chairing this hearing and inviting us to participate. So thank you all.
You may want to hire Senator Van Hollen. I think he could cut the 4 to 6 ounces per to you. It looks like his prior experience would be good for you.
Be there Monday with bell calling.
Congressman Harris,
Again, thank you all for being here. Thank you all for helping the economy of the Maryland's wonderful Eastern Shore, and thanks, Senator Cardin for bringing this Senate committee hearing to Berlin.
So rural America represents about 97% of the geography of our country, about 14% of our population, and only 10% of our GDP. So, Mr. Loeffler, your point about targeting to rural communities is a very valid point. It's something that we really need to do a better job in order to provide the economic help. It's, by definition, been underserved, and that we need to target better our programs to help rural America, and I think this hearing has helped us to understand that. We are looking at legislation in the United States Congress. I've already indicated that Senator Ernst and myself are looking at a reauthorization of the SBA laws, which would deal with many of the subjects we're talking about here and could be a vehicle to do some of the changes that we are talking about. In addition, we have the Farm Bill that's coming up in this Congress. So many of the issues that you have referred to are eligible for consideration during the Farm Bill. Maryland's kind of unique. We don't have a dominant part of the agricultural community that's in the Farm Bill. Poultry, obviously, on the Eastern Shore is a major agricultural product, but we are in a position where we have more smaller entities than most states do in the agricultural field. So it gives us a chance to try to do what we can to help in that regard. I just want to put my other hat on for one moment on behalf of the Maryland Federal Congressional Delegation, because a lot of the subjects we talked about today, we've been united on. The H-2B visas is a good example. Senator Van Hollen and Congressman Harris has already mentioned that. We recognize the desperate need for seasonal workers. We recognize that also in regards to the J visa. So we've been very much laser focused on trying to get some help. We were able to move the Biden administration in some directions, not as much as we wanted to get done, but part of the responsibility is the United States Congress in passing laws to update our worker visa program. So we're working very much on that. And then we are united in regards to small businesses. We recognize that we have to do more. We can't wait for the next unexpected challenge and say, what can we do to respond? We need to have more permanent help to deal with what we know is going to be coming down the road. And I think your testimonies today help us to better understand that and targeting traditionally underserved communities and the smaller small businesses. I love all businesses. I love all small businesses. But there's a difference between a small business that has 400 employees and a mom-and-pop operation that's struggling and doesn't have the staff to deal with these challenges. And I think your testimony has helped us in regards to dealing with those issues. So once again, I want to join my colleagues in thanking our 4-star witnesses, the mayor, and for all of you being in attendance. And with that, the committee will stand adjourned. Thank you all very
Mr.
much.
Chairman, if you
Yes.
don't mind, just before, I made an error. I missed and overlooked one of our attendees, Miss Secretary Riccio, former DNR Secretary. All the talk of fish, I'd be remiss if I didn't thank her for her service as well, so thank you. And then, once we're done, if you don't mind, I'd like to address the crowd.
Sure. The committee stands adjourned, but I'll recognize the mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, a round of applause. Thank you for bringing this hearing to Berlin. Thank you all for your stories today. We also have out back on your way out, this is the reason I really wanted to get everybody's attention, the Shore Gourmet bus is downstairs. Take a look at that. They're doing a lot for Caroline County Public Schools. I reached out to our superintendent, Lou Taylor, let him know it was out there as well. I think there's a lot that can be done here locally, Worcester, Wycomico, and Somerset, bringing healthy foods to the children in the schools. So take a look at that bus on the way out, and thank you again for bringing that. Thank you.
Thank you all.